also hope that you are having an amazing day so far. So, before we start with our lesson, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged into aplusstudents.ca with your username as well as your password, and then you're going to select the subject of language arts and then grade 1. So we are doing our grade 1 English lesson, and we're doing our grade 1 English lesson on adjectives that compare. So which means that once you've selected the subject of language arts, grade 3, then you scroll down the chapter up until you get to adjectives that compare. All right. So what adjectives that compare, we actually, in our previous lesson, we did adjectives that compare. So which means that now it's just going to be a continuation of adjectives that compare because we already started adjectives that compare within our previous lesson. And today, like we said, today we're doing the chapter of adjectives that compare. Our subject is English language arts, grade 1, and our lessons that we are focusing on is to identify comparative and superlative adjective, as well as does the adjective compare two or more than two. So, like I say, this is basically a continuation of the latest of the lesson that we did in our previous lesson, where we spoke about adjectives that compare. So now we are going to continue the lesson on adjectives that compare. All right, so when it comes to adjectives that compare, right? And before we even go into adjectives that compare, we are doing a tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So which means that if you want to go back, recap, go over certain things, you can go to aplusstudents.ca. And on the board we have our chapter, English grade 1, and the lessons that we are focusing on for today. All right. So what adjectives that compare, right? So some adjectives that compare people, animals, places, or things. So some adjectives they compare people, animals, places, or things, right? And when it comes to adjectives that compare, right, then we have comparative adjective and we also have superlative adjectives. So we have comparative adjectives and then we also have superlative adjectives. And that basically will indicate to us how or in what manner we can compare people or animals or places or things. So we first going to the first one, which is comparative adjectives. And comparative adjectives, they compare to people, animals, places, or things. So basically, two people, two animals, two places, or two things, right? Not more than that. Because remember, if you're comparing something to something else, or comparing someone to someone else, or right, then it means that there needs to be another person or another thing that you're comparing something to, right? So when it comes to comparative adjective, it only compares two people, to animals, places, or things. So only two, right, that you're comparing. And when it comes to comparative adjectives, right, comparative adjectives, they end in er. And a few examples of comparative adjectives, right, is maybe taller or shorter, um, bigger is also a it's also a comparative adjective. Younger, right? And as you can see, these words end with an er. And we call those comparative adjectives, where we compare two people, animals, places, or things. And another example, right? Well, it's a sentence example is Andy is taller than his sister, right? Which means that it is two people. They're making mention of Andy and they're making mention of his sister. That's two people. So they're saying that Andy is taller than his sister. So taller is our comparative adjective. And then we have superlative adjectives. A superlative adjective. And we see that a superlative adjective, right? It now compares two or more than two people. So superlative adjectives, they compare more than two people, right? It needs to be more than two people. Animals, places, or things. And when it comes to superlative adjectives, right? Superlative adjectives, they end in est. So we said a superlative adjective, it compares more than two people, animals, places, or things, and they end in est. And if we make an example of, let's say, basically words that end in est, then we look at this example that says, he is the tallest person in his class. So there's tallest. So he is the tallest person in the class. So we said that superlative adjectives, right? It ends in E S T. All right. So if we look at these words that we wrote down, taller, shorter, bigger, and younger, right? So if we basically change those words, not even change, if we were to compare them to, let's say, either for animals, for people, or things, right? Then we can say it is tallest. Then we have shortest. And then we have biggest and youngest. All right. So basically, when it comes to superlative adjectives, right, we compare more than two people, animals, places, or things. And we say that they usually end in est. And we made an example of he is the tallest person in his class, which means that he's not just being compared to one person, animal, place, or thing. All right. And there we made an example. We have the word taller, and the comparative adjective is tallest. There we have shorter, and our comparative is shortest. Then we said when it comes to comparative, we end, or let's say we add, or we end a word, or the word that is basically attached to the word that can stand on its own is er. All right. So there we have a comparative adjective and we have a superlative adjective. And we once again said with comparative adjectives, we compare two people, animals, places, or things. And then we made an example of Andy is taller than his sister. And then we have superlative adjectives, which is to compare more than two people, animals, places, or things. And we say that they end in est. All right. And we are doing our lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So if you do want to go back, recap, and then you can go to aplusstudents.ca. All right. Okay, so we're going into the first lesson, that is to identify comparative and superlative adjectives. And we said some adjectives that compare people, animals, places, or things, whereas a comparative adjective, it only compares two people, animals, places, or things. And we say it ends in er. And then adjective, it compares two or more people, animals, or people, animal, places, or things, and they end in est. So we said with superlative adjectives, they compare more than two people, animals, places, or things, and they end in est. And earlier on, a few examples of words that end in est, especially if it's compared to more than two people, as well as the comparative adjectives we also identified. All right. We need to find the adjective that compares. Canada is colder than Mexico. And if we look at that sentence, Canada is colder than Mexico, then we need to identify the adjective that compares within that sentence. All right, so if we identify the adjective that compare, we look at it, then we can say it is colder. So colder is our adjective that compare. So if it ends in er and then it is not, then it then it is a comparative adjective. So it's comparative if it ends in er. Another example, right, or another sentence is we need to find the adjectives that compare. Oxford is the nicest town of all. Oxford is the on nicest town of all. Let's identify the adjectives that compare within that tool. So find the adjectives that compare, and you need to find the adjective that compare within Oxford is the nicest town of all, or some adjectives compare people, animals, places, or things. Um, oh, yes. So which means that even if you look at this picture with Andy standing here with the kids, right? Andy is, for example, tall, right? If we were just to compare him to the guy in the yellow jersey, then we would have said that he is taller than, and they'll make up a name. And then we also have adjectives that is superlative. And so we said that basically the first picture with the girl and the boy, right? It basically compares to people, animals, places, or things. All right. Pete's story. Pete's story was sadder than Janet's story. So Pete's story was sadder than Janet's story. All right. So Pete's story was sadder than Janet's. If we identify or find the so we can then say that Pete's story was sadder. Sadder. So sadder is the adjective that compares, right? Because in the sentence we have two people that they're making mention of, which is Pete as well as Janet. So Pete's story was sadder than yesterday. All right. So we say Pete's story was sadder than Janet's story. And in this case, they are comparing two people or two. Yes. All right. If we look at this picture, right, and you look at this picture here at the bottom, remember we said that we have taller, we have tall, taller, tallest. All right. So we said once again, superlative adjectives, it compares more than two people, animals, places, or things, and they end in est. So if we look at this picture, right, the boy with the red t-shirt on, and if we compare this boy with the red t-shirt, for example, to the others, right, within the picture that we can see in front of us, then we can say he is the tallest. All right, so which means that he, which is Sandy, so he is the tallest. So tallest. So Andy is the tallest. He's tall, taller, but tallest. All right. All right, let's go to our test. Let's go to our test. All right, so now we're going to go to our test, right? Snow is the whitest goat of all. So Snowy is the whitest goat of all. All right, so if we look at the adjective that compare, all right, so let's then say the first one. All right, so well done. We need to find the adjective that compares. So what this is correct. So Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework. Is it homework or harder? So Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework. All right. So if we find the adjective that compare, we said Gabby's homework was harder than Beth's homework. It's comparing two people. We will say harder is. So harder. All right. This is the highest hill in Oakland. This is the highest hill in Oakland. Is it highest or Oakland? So this is the highest hill in Oakland. Is it highest or is it Oakland? All right. So we can say this is the highest in Oakland or highest. All right. Then we need to find the adjective that compares. So Blue Point is nicer than Lakewood. Mhm. All right. So if we find the adjective that compare, then we can say it's nicer. So nicer is our adjective that compare. So nicer, well done. An ant is lighter than a bee. An ant is lighter. So nicer. All right. So an ant is lighter than a bee. All right. Let's in the meantime go to lighter. All right. We need to find the adjectives that compare, and we said lighter because it says that an ant is lighter than a bee. All right. So Leo was the biggest lion of all. Is it lion or is it biggest? We need to identify the we need to find the adjective that compares. Compares. All right. So biggest is the adjective that compare. So biggest is correct. Did we choose biggest? Yes. So now we need to also find adjectives that compare. Leo was the biggest lion of all. The biggest lion. So we need to find the adjectives that compare. Leo was the all right. So Pete's story was sadder than Janet's story. Yes, bigger is or biggest, yes, is the truth as well as lighter. So now Pete's story was sadder than Janet's story. So we can go with Pete for Pete's story. Sorry, sadder actually. In Pete's story was sadder than Janet's story. So sadder is our adjective that compares, meaning that they are comparing Pete's story. So this is sadder. And today is the hot day so far. So if we select the adjective that compare, we can say it is hottest. So sweetest. So Pat is the sweetest boy I know. So biggest is correct. Luke's boat is newer than Andy's. Luke's boat is newer than Andy's. So Luke's boat is newer than Abby's. And if we find the adjective that compare, we can say it is newer. So we can say your shoes are wetter than mine. So we can say wetter. So it's wet but wetter. And that is a comparative adjective. So your shoes are wetter than mine. So wetter is our adjective that compares. All right. All right, so now we're going to the next lesson that says, does the adjective compare two or more of that two? So that's when we compare two or more. So we need to basically compare or find the adjectives of two or more than two. Either animals, people, places, things. And once again, we say some adjectives, they compare people, animal, places, or things. All right. So if we look at the picture, right, the first picture where it says Andy's taller than his sister. All right. So that is when we're comparing two people. So only comparing two people, animals, places, or things is a comparative adjective and it ends in ER. And then we have superlative adjectives, right, which compare more than two animals, places, or things. Yeah, they just visit the EST. All right. The superlative adjectives it compare more than two people, animals, places, or things. All right. So we say that if we look at the adjective, does it compare two pigs or more than two pigs? Phil's pig is fatter than Debbie's pigs. So we need to say if that word in bold is either comparing two or more than two. All right, so if we look at the word fatter, right? So the word in bold, right? The first one says at the adjectives in bold, does it compare two pigs or does it compare more than two pigs? So in this case, all right, so we can say it is fatter. Luke's house is colder than my house. Luke's house is colder than my house. All right, so Luke's house is colder, so we say colder, right? And it compares only one house. One house. All right, if we look at we say colder. So colder, oopsie, colder, it compares two houses. So colder compares two houses. So colder is it says the kitten is softer than the cat. So the kitten is softer than the cat, right? So we need to look at the adjectives in the box, the ones that are in bold, and we need to say, does it compare to animals or more than two animals? Softer than the cat. The kitten is softer than the cat. All right. So the kitten is softer than the cat. So which means that softer. Softer is the so cat, so the cat. So softer than the cat, and then we have an explanation where some adjectives compare people, animals, places, or things, and comparative adjectives it compares two people, animals, places, or things. So softer. Softer than my cat compares the animals, right? Or the two animals. All right. So softer. And softer is if something is soft, then it's soft. If it's softer, right, then it means that it's like more soft. And it compares to animals or more than two animals. So softer. All right. Now let's go to our test. And we said with our test, we look at the adjectives in bold, and then we need to say if it is two or more than two. Our pool is warmer than Dana's pool. So our pool is warmer than Dana's pool. Is it two pools or more than two pools? So it's two pools. All right. The kitten is softer than the cat. Softer than the cat. Is it two animals or more than two animals? So it's two animals or more than two animals. In this case, we can say it is more than. So the kitten is softer than the cat. It's two. So softer, it compares two animals. So this one is softer than the other one. And then Luke's house is colder than my house. Are we talking about two houses or more than houses? Mia, um, two houses or more than two houses? Luke's house is colder than my house. Is it two houses only or more than two houses? All right, so if we compare, then we're saying it's basically them saying Luke's house is colder than my house, which means that we are comparing the two houses. And then the blue train is faster than the red train. So which means that this is two trains. All right. So the old rope is shorter than the new rope. And we're going to have two males to carry that or to pull. The rope is shorter than the new rope. Okay, so yes, it's the old rope is shorter than the new rope, right? So which means that that is two ropes. Did I say two more than two ropes? I apologize. All right, so that is basically adjectives that compare, right? And we said adjectives that compare. We have superlative adjectives and we have comparative adjectives. And with comparative adjectives, it's where we compare two people, animals, places, or things, right? To another thing. But in this case, in today's lesson, we mainly focus on if it is comparing two or more than two. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson, grade one, on adjectives that compare. Thank you very much for joining. You should have a good day further. Goodbye.